The cry of a baby tore through the stillness of the grand ranch house, a lonely siren against the vast, silent prairie. For more than 3 hours, the desperate sound had not stopped, echoing off the rough-hewn wooden beams, climbing the dark pine staircase, and turning the entire homestead into a suffocating cage. Downstairs, in the scullery, Isabella Torres bent low, scrubbing the same patch of stone floor for the 4th time. She was 24, her hands chapped and raw from lye soap and endless labor, her eyes holding a deep, vacant sorrow. Yet her chest tightened with every echo of that cry from above. 6 weeks earlier, Isabella had buried her own newborn son, claimed by a prairie fever before he was old enough to know her face. Since then, the sound of a baby's cry had become a blade, twisting inside wounds that had not yet begun to heal. And tonight, that cry was awakening all her buried pain. "That child will wear himself out," Isabella whispered, but her hand pressed harder on the scrub brush, as if the harsh rhythm could drown out reality. Upstairs, Ethan Carter, only 2 months old, lay red-faced and squalling, his lips cracked and dry, his mouth moving weakly in search of something he could not find. Beside the cradle sat a bottle of goat's milk, soured and spoiled hours ago in the afternoon heat. Melissa Adams, the 28-year-old nanny hired on the recommendation of a church pastor back east, had disappeared 6 hours earlier. She had claimed she was riding to the neighboring farm to fetch a special herbal remedy for Ethan's colic. In truth, Melissa was in the town saloon, laughing with a group of rough-handed cowboys, unconcerned about the infant she was paid handsomely to care for. To her, this post on a remote ranch was nothing more than easy money and a chance to escape her past. Meanwhile, behind a closed oak door on the 1st floor, Daniel Carter, 35, Ethan's father, sat in his study. The owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory, he was a man with a face weathered by sun and sorrow, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes that even the strongest black coffee couldn't hide. For 2 hours, he had been locked in a tense negotiation with land barons from the east, their talk of boundaries and water rights the only sound breaking through his son's relentless cry. "Mr. Carter, do you confirm the price per acre?" a slick voice asked from across the heavy desk. "Of course, you can count on our agreement," Daniel replied automatically, his eyes drifting to the tarnished silver-framed photograph on his desk. It was Claire, his late wife, who had been taken by childbirth, leaving only Ethan behind. While Daniel forced himself to focus, Ethan's cries weakened, turning choked and dangerously faint. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She threw the brush into the bucket with a clatter, unable to endure another second. Her footsteps pounded against the wooden stairs, her trembling hand gripping the banister. "Please, Lord, don't let this child suffer the same fate," she prayed between rushed breaths. The nursery door swung open. What she saw drained the blood from her face. Ethan lay limp in his cradle, eyes half closed, his tiny body burning hot as a branding iron, his breath shallow and ragged. His lips kept moving, searching desperately for milk but finding only air. "Dear Lord in heaven," Isabella rushed forward, lifting the baby into her trembling arms. Ethan's body was slick with sweat, radiating a feverish heat. The sour stench of the bottle on the nightstand made her grimace in disgust. It was completely spoiled. The infant squirmed weakly in her embrace, mouth latching onto nothing, begging for salvation. In that moment, something deep inside Isabella broke open. For 6 weeks, her body had still produced milk, a cruel, physical reminder of the son she had lost. Watching Ethan fade in the same way her own child had, her grief surged uncontrollably. She stopped thinking. Instinct took over. The instinct of a mother. Dropping into the rocking chair by the window, Isabella unbuttoned her worn bodice with shaking hands and pulled Ethan to her chest. Instantly, the crying ceased. Ethan latched on fiercely, drinking with the desperation of a man lost in the desert finding water. "It's all right now, little one. You're safe," Isabella whispered, tears of sorrow and relief sliding down her hollow cheeks. And in that fragile moment, for the first time in 6 weeks, a sliver of peace returned to her broken heart. Isabella sat frozen in the rocking chair, the violent cries replaced by the fragile sounds of life, the faint but determined gulps of a baby who had just discovered hope. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Each drop of milk her body produced had been a cruel reminder of her loss. She had bound her chest, taken bitter herbs, prayed for it to stop. Yet every morning she awoke with a painful fullness that screamed of a baby who would never need her. And now, that very milk was saving another little soul. She watched Ethan's flushed face soften as his breathing grew steadier. His tiny hands clutched her dress, gripping life itself. Isabella's heart clenched, but this time not only with grief. An unshakable, primal instinct of motherhood surged through her. "Drink, little one. Let me save you," she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. In that instant, she forgot every boundary. She forgot she was only a hired girl in this grand ranch house. She forgot Daniel Carter, the powerful man downstairs, could walk in at any moment. She forgot the judgment of a world that would never understand. All that remained was her and the baby in her arms, alive because of her. Time seemed to slow. Ethan stopped suckling, his heavy eyelids closed, surrendering to peaceful sleep. But the moment did not last. The door creaked open, and Daniel's tall figure appeared, silhouetted against the hallway light. He froze on the threshold. His weary rancher's eyes widened, locking onto the scene before him. Isabella, sitting in the rocking chair, her bodice unbuttoned, his son pressed close to her chest. For several seconds, Daniel couldn't breathe. His heart pounded wildly, tangled in shock, confusion, and something else he dared not name. What in God's name are you doing?" Daniel's voice broke the silence, a low growl edged with suspicion. Isabella nearly jumped out of her skin. She hastily covered herself, clutching Ethan protectively, her eyes wide with panic. "Sir, I can explain," her voice trembled. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze locked on her. Part of him burned with rage at this unthinkable transgression. Yet another part couldn't ignore the truth. His son was quiet for the first time in weeks, sleeping peacefully, no longer wailing in torment. The tension hung heavy in the air, a silence so thick it threatened to crush all three souls in that room. "You are not his mother," Daniel tried to say, but the words died on his lips. He stepped back, startled by his own reaction. Isabella clutched Ethan closer, her head bowed. "I'm sorry, sir, but he was on the verge of collapse. The milk was spoiled. There was nothing for him. I couldn't just let him perish." Daniel's fists tightened. He looked at his son, seeing him rest calmly for the first time since Claire's death. Yet his mind churned, tangled in suspicion. When Melissa returned that afternoon, reeking faintly of whiskey, Daniel was still restless. She carried a small bundle of herbs, covering her absence with a flimsy excuse. But her shifty eyes couldn't hide the unease in the air. By evening, Melissa's whispers had already begun to spread among the other ranch hands. "They say the new hired girl," she put the master's son to her own breast. "That ain't right. It's unnatural. She lost her own babe, you know. They say grief can make a woman go mad. Now she's clinging to another woman's child." Within a day, the gossip had traveled from the ranch to the town. It was whispered over barrels at the general store and discussed in hushed tones after the Sunday sermon. Daniel received a visit from Mrs. Gable, the wife of a neighboring rancher and the town's notorious busybody. "Daniel, dear, I heard what happened," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You need to be careful with that girl. A woman who's lost a child can become obsessive. People are saying she looks at Ethan as if he were her own." He pressed his temples. "Patricia, don't believe every rumor." "Rumor? The whole territory is talking. You have to protect your family, your reputation. Your son." Each word was a thorn. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his study staring at Claire's photograph, asking silently, "If you were here, what would you think? Would you forgive me for allowing another woman to hold our son this way?" Social pressure, his own grief, and the seeds of suspicion all knotted into a chokehold. He saw Isabella playing with Ethan, saw his son happier than ever. Yet the whispers of the community were deafening. At last, he called Isabella into his study. "You are dismissed," he said coldly. Isabella burst into tears. Please, sir, let me stay. At least to say goodbye to Ethan. But Daniel turned his face away, unable to bear looking into her desperate eyes. She left the ranch house under a harsh, unforgiving sun, carrying only a small cloth bundle. From the window, Daniel saw her lonely figure fade down the long dirt road, his heart aching. Yet, a visit from the pastor an hour later, commending him for doing the right thing, seemed to affirm his decision. In the days that followed, Isabella knocked on doors in town looking for work, but everyone asked, "Do you have a letter of reference from your former employer?" Daniel never responded to the inquiries, leaving her with nothing. Her money ran out. She was evicted from her boarding house room. With only a few belongings, Isabella was forced to sleep in the livery stable. On her second night, 3 drunken cowboys approached. "Well, look what we have here," one sneered. A pretty thing all alone, Isabella bolted, hiding behind the church until dawn. By the third night, her body was giving out. A dry, racking cough burned her chest. Staggering, she heard a gravelly voice. "First time without a roof, ain't it?" She looked up to see an old prospector with a shock of white hair and kind, weary eyes. He introduced himself as Silas. "How did you know?" Isabella asked weakly. "Your eyes still carry hope." "That's how the new ones always look," he said, gesturing toward a creek bed. "Come on. There are a few of us there. You'll be safer in a group." Beneath a rocky outcropping, Isabella met others who had been broken by the harshness of the frontier. They welcomed her with weary but genuine smiles. "Rules are simple here," Silas explained. "Share when you can. Protect each other. And don't lose your dignity, even if you lose everything else." As days dragged on, her face grew gaunt. The cruelest part was waking each morning with aching breasts, her body still producing milk for a child who was gone, while the only baby she had saved had been torn from her arms. Through ragged coughs, Isabella would look up at the vast, empty sky and whisper, "Ethan, are you well? Do you still remember me?" Inside the Carter Ranch house, Isabella's absence left its mark immediately. Ethan began crying until his voice was raw. Daniel picked him up, pacing for hours. "Daddy's here, Ethan," he whispered, his voice heavy with exhaustion. But Ethan squirmed, shoved the bottle away, and screamed until his face turned purple. Melissa seemed indifferent. "It's just a phase. Babies are fickle," she shrugged, clearly relieved the crying freed her from responsibility. Things worsened. Ethan refused to eat. Daniel hired an experienced wet nurse from town. After 2 hours, she shook her head. "I've never seen a child so willful. It's like he's rejecting everything." Desperate, Daniel brought in the town doctor, a stern man named Villanueva. His tone was grave. "The boy has no fever, no physical ailment I can find. But he is in a dangerous state. It seems to be a sickness of the spirit. Sometimes, when an infant loses a deep emotional bond, they simply give up." "Bond?" "But his mother died at birth," Daniel stammered. "It doesn't have to be the mother," the doctor explained, peering at Daniel over his spectacles. "It could be anyone the baby trusted. Have you recently dismissed someone who cared for him?" Daniel's throat tightened. One name flooded his mind, Isabella. But he swallowed it back. "No. No one in particular." The days dragged by. Ethan grew weaker. Daniel sat beside his son's cradle, feeling the same helplessness he'd felt the day Claire slipped away. "My boy is fading," he thought. And it all began the day Isabella left. 3 days after Dr. Villanueva confined Ethan to bedrest, Daniel was on the verge of collapse. One afternoon, when he returned from a ride to check his cattle, he overheard hushed voices in the stable. He stepped closer, and the sight froze his blood. Melissa was handing a box of Ethan's expensive imported medicine to a traveling peddler. "This one's worth a pretty penny," Melissa whispered. "You'll make a big profit back east." The man nodded, slipping coins into her hand. Daniel exploded. He stormed forward, his voice thundering, "Melissa! What in the hell are you doing? Melissa jumped, dropping the box. Mr. Carter. I can explain. Explain? You're stealing my son's medicine to sell. Daniel roared, his eyes blazing. The peddler bolted. Melissa trembled. I needed money for my mother. She's sick. I only meant to take a little. How long have you been doing this? Daniel's voice dropped to an icy tone. Crushed by his gaze, she broke down, sobbing. Fine. I admit it. I lied about Isabella, too. I made it all up. I was jealous because you trusted her. The truth is, she was the one who saved Ethan that day. Daniel stood frozen, the confession striking him like lightning. Isabella had never been a threat. She had saved his son, and he, blinded by lies and fear of gossip, had cast her out. Guilt crashed over him. He whispered, his voice barely audible, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. He began his search the next day. The boarding house owner shook his head. She left weeks ago. Never came back. He sent telegrams to neighboring towns. He rode to every nearby settlement. Hospitals, churches, even the sheriff's office, everywhere gave the same answer. Nothing. For sleepless days passed. In the ranch house, Ethan grew weaker. On the fifth afternoon, Daniel received a message from a rancher's wife miles away. Mr. Carter, I saw a girl who fits your description in town last week. She looked sick. Daniel rode for hours, searching every dusty street, but Isabella was nowhere to be found. As night fell, he stood on the town's main street, swallowed by despair. Then, a boy ran up to him. Mister? You the one looking for Isabella? Yes. Do you know where she is? An old prospector named Silas sent me. He says she's down by the creek bed, under the old bridge. But he says to tell you, if you hurt her again, you'll answer for it. Daniel gripped the reins of his horse. I swear I'll never let her suffer again, he whispered, his heart blazing with a single purpose, to find Isabella before it was too late. Beneath the bridge, the night air was cold and damp. Daniel stumbled through the shadows. Then he saw her, curled in a corner like a fallen sparrow, a tattered blanket her only shield. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, and a sudden cough shook her fragile frame. Daniel's chest clenched. Isabella, his voice broke. She lifted her head. At the sight of him, she flinched, recoiling like a wounded animal. What are you doing here? Her voice was a hoarse whisper. Daniel stopped, afraid to scare her further. Please, listen. Ethan, my son, he's fading. The doctor says he's dying. He says, only you can save him. Isabella let out a bitter, hollow laugh. Save him? I already did. And I was thrown out like trash for it. Do you think I can ever trust you again? Daniel dropped to his knees on the damp earth before her. I was wrong, Isabella. A prideful, cowardly fool. But please, don't punish Ethan for my mistake. He needs you. He remembers you. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. Her heart waged a war within her. Part of her longed to turn away, but somewhere deep inside, Ethan's faint cries still called to her. She bit her lip, then nodded faintly. Fine. I'll go. But only for Ethan. After that, I am gone from your life forever. At the ranch, when Isabella entered the nursery, Ethan lay limp, his tiny body trembling. Doctors and neighbors hovered nearby, their faces grave. The moment Isabella whispered, Ethan, his tiny eyes cracked open. A flicker of recognition. Isabella sat down, gathering the child into her arms. Within seconds, his whimpering ceased. Ethan nestled into her embrace, his breathing slowing. Tears blurred Daniel's vision as he watched. He knew in that moment that life had handed him a second chance. From that day on, Ethan's condition improved miraculously. He began feeding again, sleeping peacefully only in the arms he recognized. Daniel stayed close, his heart aching with a mix of joy and guilt. He knew he had to atone. The following Sunday, Daniel stood on the steps of the town church after the service. Before the entire congregation, his voice firm, he declared, "Isabella Torres saved my son's life. Every rumor you have heard about her is a lie, spread by a jealous heart. I was a fool to believe them, and I apologize publicly for the injustice she has endured." The town was stunned. Melissa was dismissed immediately, becoming a pariah. The neighbors who had sneered now lowered their heads in shame. Isabella kept her focus on Ethan. One afternoon, Daniel sat beside her, quietly confessing, "I want to make it right, even if it takes the rest of my days." For a fleeting moment, Isabella looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw not hatred, but caution laced with the faintest spark of hope. 1 month later, Ethan was strong and healthy. Isabella remained at the ranch, but not as a servant. Daniel gave her a private room and treated her with the utmost respect. Ethan, with his unconditional love, became the bridge between them. On quiet evenings, the three of them would sit in the parlor, Ethan asleep on a rug while Daniel and Isabella spoke softly. In those moments, they realized family is forged not only by blood, but by love and sacrifice. One evening at sunset, Daniel took Isabella and Ethan to a high bluff overlooking the vast expanse of his land. As Ethan toddled nearby, Daniel looked at Isabella, his eyes gentler than ever. From his coat, he pulled a small, velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant gold ring. "Isabella," he said, his voice steady yet trembling, "I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go. I can't lose you again. You've become the mother Ethan needs and the woman I have come to love. If you'll give me the chance, I promise to spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of you." Isabella froze. Tears welled, not of pain, but of an emotion too vast to name. She looked at Daniel, then at Ethan, who was smiling at her. Fate had taken everything from her, and now it was offering her a second chance. "Daniel," she whispered, her hand trembling as she touched his. "I once lost everything. But through Ethan, and through you, I have found the meaning of family again." "Yes." Daniel smiled, tears glistening as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Ethan toddled over, hugging them both tightly, babbling as if sealing their promise. They were a family. Beneath the star-strewn sky, the scars of the past would never vanish. But they no longer defined her. What defined her now was this, a second chance, a new beginning, a family bound not by blood alone, but by love, sacrifice, and forgiveness.